Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for this week's NFL main slate. We're going to go through all things DFS and props for tomorrow. With first off, a look at the Draftkings DFS side, my top 3 QB stacks out there for GPP lineups. And then afterwards, we're going to focus on the prop side of things with my Underdog and Prize Picks exposure. They have already gone to out there for Sunday that you might want to keep an eye on yourself, add to a few slips of your own, and by the end, you're going to be an expert of what to expect for week 15. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop right on in. But first off, a look at those top 3 stacks. Our first stack comes from the highest total of the week. That would be that Bills versus Lions game. You got the Lions, the slight favorites, over a 56-point total between these two offensive juggernauts. And what I'm looking at for a stack would be Jared Goff and the Lions, who, believe it or not, are favorites against the Bills. And you've only got about 3.7% ownership on Goff. You've got relatively low ownership on Allen as well, but he does cost you a whole $8,500 at quarterback. So part of the reason why he's not getting all that attention likely has to do with that inflated price tag. But Jared Goff at $6,500, we don't have those same sort of concerns about. And if you take a look at some of the sportsbook lines around the industry, Jared Goff is minus 150, sometimes even more juice towards his over to go out there and score over 1.5 passing touchdowns. That, with over a 250-yard passing total, is looking like a big game out there for Jared Goff. So it sort of surprises me that he's going to be at that sub 5% mark. You've got a ton of stacking options out there, both from the Lions in terms of correlation at quarterback, or even as buybacks over there on the other side of things. So whether it's a St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta over there at tight end, even Tim Patrick could sneak into a few of your builds. Almost all of those guys are either reasonably owned, or in a few cases like Patrick and Laporta, relatively low owned at their respective positions. So there are spots where you can find leverage on top of that Jared Goff ownership. And even if you went with a St. Brown, a Williams, who is a little bit closer to the average ownership compared to the guys around them, you're not going to be overly chalky going with this sort of build. You're getting the best game environment on the slate, particularly if it goes over that 56.5-point total. You could be looking at an absolute fantasy goldmine. And with Jared Goff, he doesn't have a lot of that rushing upside. In fact, pretty much has next to no rushing upside for tomorrow. Is somebody I'm looking to take with at least 2+ pass catchers. That would include a Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery, as both of them do have some receiving upside out of the backfield, but I'm going to prefer guys like a St. Brown, Williams, Laporta, and Patrick just a little bit more than those running backs. And the reason for that is because of the matchup. A lot of people are going to be going to the running backs over there for Detroit. The Bills defense is stout against the pass, a little bit softer out there against running backs, and you're going to see that reflected with the ownership. So as I mentioned before, some of the skill position guys are about average, sometimes even below average ownership for Detroit. That is not necessarily the case with the running backs. So I'll still have them in a few builds. I'll maybe be matching the field out there in those stacks on the Gibbs and Montgomery. But the guys I'm playing a little bit more looking to actively leverage would be that passing game as a little bit lower owned. On the other side of things, we have the Bills as potential buybacks. You can see in the buyback tab, I have it down as a yes. So pretty much every lineup with a Jared Goff stack is going to have at least one player out there from the Bills, if not 2 out there in a few cases. You've got Khalil Shakir to go from. You got Amari Cooper, got James Cooks over there at running back. Kincaid is questionable, so obviously needs to be playing to be usable. But if he's out, you've got Dawson Knox, who would slot in there at that same position. You got Mac Hollins, you got Keon Coleman, even a Curtis Samuel who could be potentially used for a little bit of that buyback correlation. Our next stack, we've got Tua Tagovailoa going against the Houston Texans, and you've got yourselves a relatively high total between those two teams. I believe it's in the top 3 highest totals of the entire week, at least out there for the main slate on Sunday, and he's got a plus matchup against this Texans defense. A lot of people are going to CJ Stroud as well. Of course, here you can see all the projections for quarterbacks over here on this projection sheet. I do have my player pool blacked out, as I've got to keep some of that behind the Patreon paywall, but did want to make sure I could give you guys these projections over here on the left for a little bit of perspective on why I'm getting to each of these players. So you can see on paper, CJ Stroud is maybe a quote-unquote better play because he projects about 2.3 points better than a Tua. But if you take a look at the defensive matchups, the Texans have been a lot worse against opposing quarterbacks than what you have on the flip side. So I would say that Tua maybe has a better chance for a ceiling performance, even if his median projection is just a hair lower than what you have there with CJ Stroud. In terms terms of guys that are going for 300 plus passing yards, 3, maybe even 4 passing touchdowns through the air, I would say that Tua has a much better chance of getting to that sort of performance because of the soft matchup on the defensive side, as opposed to a CJ Stroud who's going against a top 7 defense in terms of fantasy points allowed per game. On the flip side, you've got the Texans who are bottom half in the league in that category, so I think that feeds into why I'm getting into a Tua over Stroud, but also you've got lower ownership out there on the Tua side, and I like guys like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, even Jonnu Smith over there at tight end for a little bit of the correlation. You could go to Devin Achane out of the backfield as well, as he's been getting 4 to 6 catches pretty much every single week. A lot of guys that you can use for that correlation on the same team. In terms of buybacks, Nico Collins, if you want to go the whole way towards the top end of the wide receiver board, if you can afford it, I love him as a buyback. A little bit more affordable options would be a Dalton Schultz, maybe a Tank Dell. And at running back, it's also a spend up out there with Joe Mixon, but if you can afford it, he makes a lot of sense against that Dolphins front. While the Dolphins do have that top 7 passing defense, they've been a little bit more susceptible to the rushing game. So somebody like Mixon would make a perfect spot as a buyback, as he has that plus matchup. You're also getting the plus matchup on the other side of the ball with Tua going against that Texans secondary. So I think it makes a lot of sense to go with that kind of stack. So I could see myself using a lot of Tua, maybe Tyreek Hill and Waddle over there at the wide receiver, and maybe running it back with Joe Mixon at running back. And for our last stack that we're going to go through here, and of course, guys, right, these are not the only stacks that I'll be playing this week. As of right now, I have 9 quarterback stacks that I'm playing out there for tomorrow. So these are just 3 that should give you a good idea of what I'm looking for out there in my quarterbacks. But another relatively high total game between the Chargers and the Buccaneers, and a little bit higher ownership here. I've actually got Herbert at just about 10% ownership out there in GPPs, but a really good game environment and a matchup against that Buccaneers secondary that has been bottom 5 in the league when it comes to fantasy points allowed per game. So that's a huge plus when it comes to the matchup this week. You've also got a lot of pass catchers that could be used for correlation. McConkey is questionable as of right now, but if he plays, he's going to be a spot I'm using for a lot of that correlation. They've got Quinn Johnston. You've got Joshua Palmer at wide receiver. Stone Smart, by the way, is going to be a huge value at tight end with Will Dissly already rolled out for this week. And you can even go to one of those backup running backs for the LA Chargers, whether that be a Gus Edwards, a Kamani Vidal, who's more of that receiving back over there for LA, for some correlation out there. And outside of McConkey, who, if he plays, I think is going to be really chalky, these guys like Johnston, Palmer, even Smart, I think it'll be like sub 15% ownership. You're going to be able to get leverage at some of these other spots. So while this 9.7% number is actually the highest ownership at the quarterback position, you're going to have players, whether it's one of those running backs, Palmer, Johnston especially, you're getting at sub 10% ownership to go out there and offset some of the ownership at the same time. And then over there for your buybacks, that's part of the reason I really like these 3 stacks, is the buybacks are amazing in all 3 cases. You've got that Buccaneers-led offense with Mike Evans back, Caden Otton, who's been an absolute stud. Caden Otton, by the way, is one of my core plays for this week. So these, of course, are 3 core plays at the quarterback position that I'm getting to. On the other tabs here, we've also got all my projections at every other position. So you can see over here, Cade Otton is a core play for me. I can't show you guys every tab as I have to keep these projections behind the paywall. But of course, to get access to all my projections, my entire player pool, all the QB stacks that I'm playing for tomorrow, make sure to check out my Patreon page. So there's a link in the description of the video to go out there and join there. It's only $15 a month, so way cheaper than almost every other site out there, and you're getting a lot more value when it comes to the projection side. Not only all of these main slate projections, but complete showdown breakdowns out there for all the island games. You guys don't want to miss it. And then in terms of buybacks, on top of Evans obviously makes a lot of sense, but if Bucky Irving is out, Rachaad White could be one of the best values at the running back position on the slate. You've also got Jalen McMillan. Sterling Shepard is questionable as of right now. If Shepard would be out, that would boost Evans just a little bit, but it would make Jalen McMillan also one of the best values that we have on the slate. So this Buccaneers team, I'll be stacking both sides of all 3 of these games, by the way. So Josh Allen on the other side of Jared Goff will be playing. I'll be playing a little bit of CJ Stroud. And then over here with the Tampa Bay side, Baker Mayfield stacks make quite a bit of sense as well. And particularly if we're going to have an extremely concentrated offense, if guys like Irving or Shepard were to be rolled out. So that's a team that I'm going to be monitoring very closely as of right now if they're all playing, and maybe prefer the Justin Herbert side of things. But if we do have a few injuries that make a few guys really good projecting plays, I might be playing a little bit more Baker Mayfield out there in my GPP exposure. So, of course, guys, make sure to join the Patreon page so you can see all those projections as they update there before lock to adjust for all the injury news that is sure to come. And now for the prop side of things, where I've got 2 props on Underdog and 2 props on Prize Picks that I've already entered myself. You might want to consider adding to a few slips of your own. So we're going to start here on the Underdog Fantasy side with, first off, the Jahmyr Gibbs over on rushing and receiving touchdowns. So it's at 0.5, just needs to get into the end zone once. And considering that he's minus 170 to score in books like Pinnacle, which by the way are 2A markets that have the yes and the no option available, this is a no-brainer even with the 0.94x payout. Even if we didn't have vulture protection, that would already be solid enough value. But considering that we also have the protection of David Montgomery, where to go out there and score that 1-2 yard touchdown, makes this something that I just cannot avoid. If you've been following the channel for the year, I've probably played this prop like 10, maybe even 12 times already over the first 14 weeks. It's because of the vulture protection. And anytime you have 2 elite tier running backs on the same team, both with sometimes 50, maybe even over 50% touchdown equity like you have here in this sort of game. By the way, if you don't know how the vulture protection works, if David Montgomery were to go out there and score a rushing and receiving touchdown, that would protect Jahmyr Gibbs. So let's assume that Baker Mayfield were to go out there and hit. We end up getting vultured. Maybe Gibbs doesn't get into the end zone. What would happen if Baker Mayfield hits is that we would get refunded, and we'd also get a promo the next day. So it'd give you some sort of like 0.5 prop to go out there and give you a little bit of a heads up to essentially make up for that Baker Mayfield hit that you had. So it's a nice little program that they have. The promo's nice after. Getting your money back if the other guy steals the touchdown is also a nice little added bonus. And on top of the fact that he's already minus 170 to score. And if you take a look at David Montgomery's odds, he's minus 150 on some books to score, but on Pinnacle, he's also at minus 170 to score. So you're essentially getting 2 minus 170 guys over here with the same prop, which is why I think it's such good value. So if you've been here on the channel, it's not like this always cashes. There's been 2 times this year where neither one of those guys has gone out there and scored when we've gone out there and played this. Almost every other time, I think it's like the 9 or 10 other times that we've played this, he's either hit or gone vultured protected. So it's a solid spot, makes sense per the math, and in actuality has paid out really well this year. And then the other prop that I'm taking on top of that Jahmyr Gibbs prop is going to be this Baker Mayfield over on passing attempts. He's at even money on most books now. FanDuel is actually juiced towards the over a little bit, and on sites like Pinnacle and Draftkings, he's minus 120 to minus 125 for the over. So we're actually getting a little bit of a boosted payout because of the multiplier for the over, which was done earlier in the weekend. Since the odds have started to shift a little bit, you've seen this turn into a little bit of value. And what I like about this spot is, first off, the Chargers are a tough defense on that side of the ball, but with Bucky Irving potentially being rolled out, we'll have to see how that news shakes out over the next day or so. Maybe Sterling Shepard that's out. They have so many guys out on the offensive side that they could be playing a little bit of inefficient play out there, right? What you have when you have a lot of injuries is sometimes some sloppy offense, and that oftentimes leads to you playing from behind. The game script could be favorable if that were to be the case, and because the Tampa Bay is already underdogs on the road against the Chargers, they could be playing from that direction regardless of the injury situation. So I think if Bucky Irving is out, that would make them a little bit more pass heavy. We'll have to see how that shakes out. I think the game script, the spread favoring the Chargers are all reasons why you'd want to consider this over. So Baker Mayfield's been one of the most pass-heavy quarterbacks in all of the NFL this year, and considering that the Chargers already let up close to 34 passing attempts per game, makes this an obvious over spot in my opinion. So that would pay 2.96x if you took those two together. So go ahead, lock them in before any potential bumps. And then over here on the Prize Pick side, we've also got 2 props I've entered. First off, this over on Isaiah Pacheco at 13.5 rushing attempts, who could be dealing with a little bit of a weather game. If you haven't already seen the news, that game between Kansas City and the Browns is looking to be rainy and windy for most of the game, if not all of the game. So if you saw over there for Thursday Night Football, that little bit of a washout that we had actually rained a lot more than what the forecasts were calling for there on Thursday. No one saw that coming. So hey, if you had the no touchdown bet, congrats to you. You went out there and you won on Thursday. I'm not saying it's going to be as bad, right? This game between the Chiefs and the Browns, you had the perfect storm over there on Thursday. It was bad weather and bad offense, and really good defense, frankly, out there for both sides that led to that sort of game. This game this weekend could be as sloppy from the conditions perspective, though. So anytime we get that sort of game, you see a little bit more rushing for both offenses. That would benefit in Isaiah Pacheco. And what I like about this is that he's going to be getting healthier every week that he's back. Every, set of practices that he's go through, every single week after returning from a fracture is going to lead to more confidence in him getting more work. So Kareem Hunt, sure, he's been getting some touches out there for the Chiefs. Even despite that, Pacheco went over this line the last time out. I think as we get further into the season, though, you're going to see Pacheco get even more of that workload. That is just the logical thing to happen. He's the better of the two running backs, the more efficient on the ground, and the guy that they're going to rely on going forward. So I would say that even if it rolls out like last week, especially with this weather situation, I really like this over on Pacheco, who, by the way, is minus 135 for his over there on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I believe was like minus 120, maybe like minus 128. It was one of those two over there on the FanDuel side. Either way, I think as people start to react to that weather news, that it's going to juice even more. And frankly, I would be pretty surprised if this didn't bump to 14 or 14 and a half by the time that we got to lock tomorrow afternoon. Then the other prop that I took was this under on Jonathan Taylor rushing and receiving touchdowns, who I never really like betting against Jonathan Taylor because I truly think he's maybe the best running back that we have in the NFL. Now, Saquon Barkley has probably taken that away this year, but if you had a similar type of offense around Jonathan Taylor, I think he'd be putting up comparable sort of numbers. He's a very good running back, but unfortunately is playing on an inefficient offense, and this weekend has maybe the toughest matchup in all football against running backs. In terms of rushing touchdowns allowed per game, the Broncos only allowed 0.38 rushing touchdowns per game this year. So that is just over a third of a touchdown per game. But the fact that Jonathan Taylor is minus 131 for his under on two-sided markets like Pinnacle. Not a lot of markets, right, where you can bet the under on rushing touchdowns, but on the few that are available, even some of the major books do have the no option on there. He's about minus 130 for the under. So when you give me that, the really tough matchup against Denver, they are, of course, underdogs against that Broncos team as well. So game script could be working against them. You give me all three of those factors, and it's one of the rare circumstances where I actually bet against my guy Jonathan Taylor. He's been really in a rough stretch lately. He's not been scoring a lot of touchdowns, so that's not the main reason I'm getting to this. Of course, right, you got to treat every game as its own individual outcome, but with this sort of matchup, it's the kind of spot where I think he's less likely to go out there and get into the end zone. So game script, matchup, odds, whatever you got to look at, it's all favoring the under there, and hence why I'm taking that for a 3x payout. Of course, guys, these aren't the only slips that I'll be entering out there before lock. In fact, as of right now, I've still got other props that I've already got entered. Make sure to check out the Patreon page for all the exposure on that side as well. On the prop tier, you can get access to all the prize picks and underdog props that I'm entering out there before lock. So whether it's for the island games or over there for tomorrow's main slate, make sure to join over there to get access to all of that. And not only are you guys going to get all the different slips as I'm entering them before any sort of bumps end up happening, but you're also going to get the reasoning behind them and a really big crash course on what to look for out there in NFL props. So if you want to become a better of the NFL, learn how to find value your own out there on the NFL board, make sure to join for that aspect, and of course to see all the props that I'm playing out there for tomorrow. That's all I've got out there for the week 15 main slate. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared out there for tomorrow. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come, and give me your top score out there for tomorrow's main slate for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. If you guys can give me the top DraftKings score out there for tomorrow's main slate, you will win a free month of the Patreon. No score needed. It's hard enough to go out there and get the top score with so many games going on. So go ahead, give me your best guess down below. It'll be first come, first serve, by the way, on the players. So if you want to get one of those premier guys, make sure you go ahead and comment right away. But that's all I've got out there for this week's main slate. Best of luck out there with all of your exposure for tomorrow, whether it's in GPPs. Hopefully you can go out there and take down a few contests. On the prop side of things, let's get some luck. Let's try and cash out of these two prop slips that we've entered. Let's make it a good one to remember. Only a few regular season weeks left to work with, so let's make them count.